Welcome back to Network Africa. I still have with me Ambassador here. Now, before we went on that break earlier, you talked about the fact that Egypt has to prove to the world that, they still remain #1 in terms of tourism in Africa, so to speak. Now, what proof are you talking about here?
Okay, tourism is sold along channels. These channels are controlled by people, tour operators, network groups, and what correct people normally do, good countries, is to walk through those channels, provide guarantees, prove to the few people who control those channels that things are in place to take care of XYZ. The normal traveler don't know about these guarantees, but the people who control those channels are the people that countries normally reach out to. So there will be lots of farm trips now for tour operators. There will be waivers and discounts for package tours. Then a lot of effort to prove to them you're secure. You don't have to fly Egypt Air if your problem is Egypt Air. There are lots of charter flights done by even the tour companies. TUI owns its own aircraft. So a lot of these things will be done. I said these are the securities that are in place. The Russians almost fled because of what happened with the Sharm el-Sheikh. Before, if you had gone to Sharm el-Sheikh, if you swing your arm, you probably hit a Russian. So now, the largest hotel I've seen in operation was in Hurghada, 1,500 Russians. And I was wondering how they knew who was in the hotel. Then I saw the tags, and the beaches were chock-a-block. So the Egyptians have done this many times. So they know what to do, and the money is there to be able to finance that. All they need to do is keep letting the people know we are doing the right things. And you don't have to fly Egypt Air if the problem is about, because if you check, the problem this time is about the airline.
All right, thank you very much, Ambassador Ikechuku, for joining us on Network Africa.
Thank you.
The world as we know it is experiencing serious security threats from assorted radical groups like Boko Haram, Al-Qaeda and Al-Shabaab, to mention a few, and there have been calls for a concerted effort by affected countries to put mechanisms in place to defeat such terrorist groups. However, some analysts say it might be time to consider fighting terror with words as opposed to guns, since it's an ideology which those in such groups live by. Now, joining us live from London is security and terrorism expert David Otto. David, we're glad to have you on Network Africa. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.
Now, the military appear to have an upper hand in the war on terror here in Nigeria. But do you support the school of thought which says an ideology cannot be fought with guns?
I think, first of all, we have to consider that the geographical location of Boko Haram means that, we cannot isolate any success, of the military, within the Nigerian borders, because we are very much aware that, Boko Haram, operates in Chad, operates in Niger, operates in Libya. But then again, when it comes to defeating terrorism using military tactics, we are very, very much aware that, you cannot defeat, an ideology using military tactics, because you can kill a terrorist, but you will never, never kill an ideology. So I think what we need is rather, to have a counter-ideology, which we do not have. So the most important thing is having this military strategy at a certain level, but then, addressing some of the root causes that terrorism, feeds from. So we're talking about, injustice in the communities. We're talking about marginalization. We're talking about relative deprivation. So these are some of the things which, the military enhancement with community initiatives will bring on the table. But if you want to kill an ideology using a gun, that will never happen, because, it's never happened before. And, we're fighting an invisible enemy. We are not fighting a conventional warfare, where, in the case of Nigeria and the surrounding regions, groups like Boko Haram fighters, they can clearly see the military, but the military do not know who they are.
Now, as a terrorism expert, what moves would you like to see on the part of authorities that could potentially lead to a change in ideology?
The most important thing, when it comes to the ideology that groups like Boko Haram, ISIL, and Al-Shabaab and the rest practice, we have to understand that, ideology on its own is not a cause of violence. What causes violence is when, there is injustice that is being used as a push factor by these organizations to then preach, violent extremism. So I think, the best moves, for the government to do is either to address some of those underlying issues, which I spoke about earlier on in terms of, looking at marginalization, because this is what terrorist organizations use. The ideology will always be there, but what they use is, they get these vulnerable young men who are either deprived or they're either marginalized, or, some of them, they're giving them this twisted, ideological discourse. But the reason why ideology triumphs is because, of these underlying factors which, needs to be addressed. But to fight an ideology, definitely you need, a replacement ideology. So that can only be created, or formed by, community organizations, but not by the military.
Now, David, you've spoken to us on the issue of copycat terrorism in the past. But what role should the media be playing to ensure that we don't fuel the fire as it is?
We have to also consider that, the media has their role, and security solution practitioners, also have their role. The role of the media is to report the information as they receive it. The role of security analysts is to provide solutions for the problems on ground. So it's very difficult for you to find a balance between, what you want the media to report, because, the media feeds on this information in order for them to survive. So it's very difficult for you to actually deprive the media the opportunity to report information. I think the most important thing is if the government, together with civil society organizations, collaborate, and do their jobs properly by getting all these some of these factors which, push young men to become involved in violent extremism. I think, the media will then jump onto some of these solutions and also report it. Because, mind you, the media reports things, based on, the information that they gather. So you cannot really blame the media for copycat attacks, because what the media does is, as ambivalent as it is, they report, what they actually see. So I think the most important thing, as I said earlier on, is for governments to be able to address some of these issues, which are underlying factors, rather than blaming the media for reporting information which, is what they receive.
Well, thank you, David, also for your time.
Thank you very much.
Well, speaking of fights, let's bring you the latest in the fight against corruption. The Secretary of the Presidential Committee on Anti-Corruption, Professor Bolaji Owasoye, is asking the federal government to keep to its fight against corruption. The Secretary further explained that 21 out of 36 states are technically insolvent, largely due to corruption.
Member of the body of benchers. You're welcome, sir.
It is a review of 1 year of democracy under President Muhammadu Buhari, as legal experts and security agents converged on Abuja to brainstorm on the state of the nation. The Secretary of the Presidential Committee on Anti-Corruption blames the current problem of the country on massive corruption.
Buhari's surgical procedures have however so far been resisted by a vocal minority of native doctors, sometimes suggesting somewhat hypocritically to themselves that the patient is not ill, and that if ill, the sickness is not terminal, not life-threatening.
The chairman of the MBA Committee on the Administration of Justice advocates the need for speedy trial of criminal cases, just as a member of the House of Representatives announced plans by the legislature to amend the EFCC and ICPC Act.
It must be a source of concern to the federal government that the successes achieved by the Nigerian military in its fight against Boko Haram has not been matched by the effective prosecution of arrested insurgents.
Right now we are amending the EFCC Act. We are also amending the Police Act because we feel we need to do that in order to empower those agencies and those institutions to do things right.
The president of the Nigeria Bar Association advises the federal government to take steps to arrest issues of security and the economy. The civil society activist who berates the government on its handling of the agitations from the South-South and the South-East shares this opinion.
We believe that for any nation to grow, certain things must be in place. So those are the factors we are going to look at. Rule of law, which is very important. Without rule of law, every other thing pales into insignificance.
We can as well project that going forward, things may not necessarily improve unless we take certain critical steps.
The one-day event, which aims at reviewing 1 year of democracy under President Muhammadu Buhari, is focusing on the rule of law, economic growth, security, and the war against corruption.
Still to come on Network Africa, Kigali authorities launch a campaign to clear street vendors from the capital city. Please stay with us.